Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Andrew, for putting on this great conference. We're all really lucky today to have three really great people who represent some of the greatest brands in the entire United States and world. To my left, first, is Steven Ferdakis. Steven's the Chief Information Security Officer at HBO, where he has responsibility for the management of IT security, establishment of policy, and oversight of networks and applications. To Steven's left is Cody Oliver. Cody manages network and IT investment recovery for Verizon. His goal is to optimize recovery opportunities through continuous process improvements and new technologies while maintaining corporate, environmental, legal, and regulatory compliance. And to Cody's left is John Sauter. John is the Information Technology Director for the Major League Baseball Players Association. He provides leading-edge technological solutions to support and protect every player in Major League Baseball. So with that introduction, we'll get on with the questions. And we'll start right to my left. Steven and all my panelists, how do you leverage technology to help protect your great brand?
Thank you for the opportunity, and hello everyone. It's the first time this week that somebody is not asking me a question about a show on Sunday night. I'm happy to talk about something different. So I want to start with some thoughts. In our business, it is essential that we protect our partner's brand, not only our own brand. We cannot make movies on our own, so we rely on people coming to work with us, and we come up with a method to protect our brand, but also theirs. If we do not do that, they have all kinds of other choices to go work with others. So our challenge, and I'm going to go into the technologies obviously, but our challenge is how do we do this with as little technology as possible? So while everyone will try and say, let's employ the biggest possible arsenal that we have, and we can, what we want to project to the various directors and the production companies is that we're actually easy to do business with, and we're not going to stifle your creativity, and we're going to do it with the least possible way to change your processes or to be too intrusive, and we're going to do it with the least technology possible. The visual that we want to employ as we try to identify what is the best method to do that is velvet gloves. So it is inevitable, though, that as we look at our supply chain, we have to make sure that our asset, as it is developed all the way into the production and the broadcast process, is secure. We need to look at the use of social media. As I said, even though we may not be directly responsible, as talent engages into making a movie, they may be over-exuberant and indulge into sharing information about the script into social media. This is something we monitor. I'm going to introduce the notion of whitewashing their profiles, so that's something we're asking them to do, and we monitor that they do that. But also we have some other interesting issues about protecting our brand. That includes monitoring drones flying over our sites and taking pictures. So we have methods to deal with that got us into a lot of interesting areas of how do we deal with this and the legality of actually doing it one way or another. And then obviously on the post-production side, employing technologies such as digital watermarking and tracking. And as I said, in certain cases, depending on the timing of things, we may do something or we may not. So that's what we do. And I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to go into detail.
Sure. Cody, at Verizon, how do you leverage technology to protect your great brand?
Well, I think in what I do specifically is around that investment recovery side, which it doesn't always have the prettiest technological advances in that, and I think really for us it's partnering with folks that and companies that can help us in that realm, and really utilizing and leveraging their their technologies for data wiping and certificates of destruction and on-site shreddings. There's just a lot of manual things, and it kind of gets into more contractual type of language and ensuring that we have zero landfill language in there, and then it comes down to a lot of auditing tools, centralized data gathering. It's actually pretty low key in the sense of technology, and that's the interesting part. But it is partnering with the right folks, having diversification, having multiple vendors do the same thing, not lowering your risk levels. I think even to the sense of risk assessments of the locations, and making sure you're doing regular quarterly virtual audits, ensuring that your data is being destroyed. That I think our biggest challenge is such a vast field of folks across the U.S. and the world of ensuring what is supposed to come back, and you're receiving it and vetting that. So it is around tools in monitoring that from that process, and then even things like web crawlers to keep an eye out there for items that may be out there for sale on the World Wide Web that don't flow through your normal channels, and trying to identify that, researching it. It's interesting as you go down that road, and sometimes it is, I've found, stuff gets communicated, and we're literally just calling the eBay sellers and trying to, hey, where did this come from, and then, next moment you see it disappears from the website. So it's not so pretty in that sense, but, it really is making sure you're working with folks, because you don't need that big of a team if you partner with the right folks and ensure that they're working with the right certifications, so you guys don't have to.
And John, you're dealing with a lot of players and teams. How do you manage to create some sense with using technology to protect the Major League Baseball Players Association?
Well, it's a lot like trying to herd a bunch of wet, angry cats. We don't just protect our brand. We manage the collective bargaining rights for our players. So if anybody's seen a product out there with two or more players, that's licensed from the MLBPA.
Wow.
On top of that, each individual player has their image and likeness out there, and we help them manage. We're monitoring the social media, trying to get them verified, get the little check mark on their thing, and make sure nobody's stealing it, and they're constantly trying to steal it. We get a lot of, every day we get the social engineering calls where, I want to talk to the guy that's in charge of players. Okay, who are you looking for? The guy that's in charge of players, that can talk to players. Yeah, okay, give me a name and we'll talk to you. But until then, quit messing with us. So we get all different levels, all different, and then on top of that, we've got these players out here that are interested in playing baseball. They're not interested in learning how to program an iWatch or an iPad, and they get iPads and iWatches constantly. They get more, we have a yearly meeting for the players, and we tried to give away iPads, and they're like, are you nuts? I need another iPad like I need a hole in the head. These things are Frisbees for these guys, which is a problem because they don't see the security for what it needs to be, and they don't secure their devices. So it's an education issue, and trying to get them to cooperate and trying to work on things. Then you just got the availability of what's out there. We started trying to use iPads during the last negotiation sessions, trying to secure information for the players so that we could talk to them. And the software that was out there was either way too intrusive or not nearly controlling enough. And we really didn't find a good fit. Write this guy down. The Big Tin Can, by the way, an up-and-comer. They've got some really good software out there that's kind of the in-between really good security. But it took us a while to find them, like the partnership, finding the right person. Wet, angry cats.
Well, John, let's stick on that. Cybersecurity is an ecosystem. And you mentioned Big Tin Can. What other software, hardware, processes, procedures, and feel free to tell stories without giving up any of your players or teams or anything, but what are some of your greatest hits and stories around the processes and procedures you're doing to protect the teams and the players, in many instances, like you said, from themselves?
Well, or just from the general ignorance.
Right.
Yeah, we had a situation, y'all might remember a situation in Brazil with the Russians. And the Russians got caught, I guess, I don't know if they were doping, I don't know exactly what they were doing, but they were using substances they weren't supposed to. And the way that they got caught was because somebody hacked into the people that were taking the samples and doing the tests, reporting the results. And everyone else said, oh, those Russians, and boy, the Olympics sure have a problem. And the NFL, the MLB, the NBA, we all said, oh shit, because we're using the same guys. And we realized that the process that was being used was low key, but it was just wrong. It was basically putting information out there that was relatively easy to hack, and we had to go through a whole setup. I mean, we had to revamp the process from the ground up in order to eliminate those. Obviously, I'm not going to go into the details of exactly what we did or what we found.
Right.
But we had to revamp the process itself from the ground up. So it wasn't even a technological issue. It was about the process that was being used and the tools and how the tools were being invested in that we had to completely redo. And as a result, I hope that the not just the MLB, but the other sports and the Olympics even got a little more secure over all of that. Cross our fingers.
Cody, how about you? Processes, procedures, software or hardware in the ecosystem of cyber. What's Verizon's approach to all this?
Yeah, it is kind of boots on the ground, as I mentioned before. I think it's being involved with your partners and your team. And you find consolidations too of different silos of your business becomes challenging. So how do you bring those all together? How do you make, to John's point, is training. How do you get people out there in the field? And when I talk, obviously I'm dealing with the network, the employees and stuff. We do a lot of great things outside of that for companies and tracking of transportation and fleet. And there's so many great things out there for food and drug, measuring that. But internally, yeah, it is a lot of boots on the ground. It's going to these places. And the biggest thing I see and everybody's facing with is kind of this national sword, challenge that's happened in China, and how do you really deal with that? And it's just being up to date on the laws and certifications, and where you say a lot of folks will go state and federal compliance. Well, that's really loose, and it's not the best thing. And then you talk about R2 compliance is a little bit better, but not a whole lot. And then you really want to look into that e-steward piece, and what we do too is require what we call waste-wise reporting, and it's definitely worth looking at. You don't have to join the EPA and all that, but it's really important to have that internal piece, and you really find out who your vendors are providing their stuff downstream, what commodities are going where, and then you start to see that trend on a monthly basis. And one of the stories I tell, and just from our experience, with something like remote controls from all of our cable boxes. For those in the East know about it, in the West it doesn't really exist out there. But you're going, wait a minute, why am I seeing all of a sudden this landfill piece going up? And it was due to people can't get rid of plastic, and there's a cost associated with it. So a lot of times, state and federal. You can, California is excluded, and maybe Oregon, but it can go in the landfill. But you got a Verizon logo on there. We had 8 trucks lined up for a certain company that was partnering with us to end up there, and because they were worried there was a cost associated with getting rid of that. So and it's per pound and things like that, but it is about doing the right thing, and there is a little bit of money involved with that. And as sustainability becomes more important as well, you want to keep embracing that trend. So it is boots on the ground, really monitoring at a high level those vendors, and that's probably, I think WasteWise has been what we call WasteWise reporting. It's kind of our own internal tool, but knowing where it's going and that everybody's vetted downstream, and that training is happening too with subcontractors, with trucking companies, because you got a company that handles it real well, but they're not the ones picking it up. They don't know. So it's just following through and providing that training internally as well, and having that in one location as well is important. And you'd be amazed, over the past few years of really kind of meshing our companies together in silos. It's just stuff comes out of the woodworks that I didn't even know existed, from snowcats to wheel balancing machines, and now we're struggling. Like, what do we do?
Wearable computers.
Yeah, so it isn't always about just cybersecurity. So no, that's not what we're talking about here today. But there are all these other things. It may be your desks, it may be your chairs, etc. It is, and people get fined, and that's the other piece. You see these companies that get fined, not to be named, and it's been a while, but $52 million for practice of dumping in landfills, and they make it sound like they're knowingly tossing this stuff away, right? It's not. It's just somebody going, it's just, there's electronics in these keyboards. I didn't know that. They kind of look at just, it is just a hard drive. That's all we care about. But yeah, if your logo's out there on something and it's ending up in there, it will be found, and that's, people make a living off of taxing and finding folks, and even if it's somebody else down the line doing it, who are they coming for, right? They're coming for your brand and where the money lies, not to the folks down low.
Nowadays, you'll find a picture of your logo sitting in a dump on Twitter.
Yeah, yes.
50 million people suddenly coming down on you, and you're like, I just licensed this stuff, guys. I don't.
Right, yeah, and it's illegal dumping, and it's not. It's just, it was an accidental dumping. I know that doesn't make a difference, but it is important.
Stephen, the same question to you, and you mentioned earlier the use of drones. You must have a lot of different types of technology you use to protect your great brand.
But there is a pattern now emerging, all right? The pattern is that we have technology, but you got to understand the process. So I'm going to share with you certain stories, some anecdotes about how we sat back and we utilized technology, or we utilized a changing process. But let's start from, what do you want to be known as? So we said you want to be known as sophisticated, of course. You want to be known as easy to do business with, and you want to be known as easy, yet with access to a lot of different kinds of technology. So, but here's an example of, we send limos to pick up talent, to take talent to shows and to the locations, all right? So you send a limo. So in order to do that, you have to have access to, say, Clooney's gated house code to allow the limo to enter. So we had situations where people actually impersonated the limo driver. And that's where you sit back and say, how do we employ a low-tech approach where now every single show has the little code that the company has to give us? And how do you say, I'm not going to do business with multiple companies, but I have to find a company that is nationally, or in certain cases, internationally represented? Now, you told somebody mentioned before supply chain. So I can tell you that for a typical show that is 45 minutes, we send to our partners, the partners do the dubbing and the subtitling, they send to their companies, their affiliates, and they may take things out, or they may do, depending on their modality, they may do commercial breaks, and then they send out. So by that sort of chain of distribution, there goes digital watermarking. Bye-bye, because what you send out is not what the triple-down customer gets to see. So anyway, so what we figured, and we said, when you have a high-profile show that it's going to be pirated and it's going to be copied and leaked and all of that, what do? So a typical request for a dubbing and subtitling may be 15 days. And we say, you must be kidding me, that we're not going to do that. How about 2? And they say, well, I don't have enough time to do that. So again, the low-tech approach, or it could be as a medium-tech approach, would be to actually only send what they need, the mouths. That's all you need to do dubbing. So you come up with an approach where you say that we will release only part of what you need to do your job, and that allows you to bring your supply chain and the distribution down to something very small, and therefore minimize the opportunity for leaking. Now, drones. Oh boy. So in the beginning of a certain show that I was shooting in Belfast.
Does it rhyme with thrones?
Across from the Titanic Museum, if you happen to be in Belfast. So we saw drones flying, and we had the low-tech approach, guys that make me look really small with dogs. Doesn't work great. because of the range of these drones. So there are technologies right now that you cannot buy. You have to either be an airport or a government and such. But those technologies are really good about detecting what kind of drone, where the drone left, what is the pattern of the flying of the drone, and whether the drone has been registered under a specific name. They actually can tell you all of this.
So FAA type of regulated drone,
Well, okay. It's
a
not-
governing body type.
Yeah,
of,
they can buy it, or you can employ a contractor that can do that. So,
Right.
So what happens then is you detect that, and then you pass the information to your physical security contractor, and then they take it from there. In the UK, and you also, again, as I said, you have to know your business. In the US, you can do that. In the UK, you can do that. You cannot jam a drone. That is illegal. So there are technologies that can do that, but you cannot legally employ those technologies in jurisdictions that at least I'm aware of. I'm sure
Right.
you can go into some deserted island somewhere and you happen to be shooting, you can probably do that. But that's where, as I said, it's not just about technology, guys. It's about understanding the business, understanding your operating environment, and sometimes employ a different process or sometimes
Right.
employ technology. That's how it works.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, we live in a world now of what's becoming part of our vernacular is AI, robots, cobots, and all sorts of other new technologies. Stephen, can you share a little bit about, you mentioned drones, of course, already, AI, robots, cobots, or anything like this with regards to new technologies to help protect your great brand, like you said, cross-purpose in terms of you're dealing now as you're sharing in multi-jurisdictions with all sorts of unique issues that you're facing. Some of your cures work in some jurisdictions, it doesn't work in others. What's happening with new technology and how you deploy it to help protect your brand?
I'm a skeptic when it comes to things like this. My wife says I'm cynical, but there are companies that would certainly employ artificial intelligence, or let's be honest, most of the times they're just too sophisticated pattern matching. But okay, you look at artificial intelligence, and as I said, there are competitors of ours that employ that and say, oh, you know, there's money to be made by shows that have, you know, this futuristic notion and a lot of blood and fighting and, you know, and a lot of sets, and it wouldn't be HBO if it wasn't. But we don't actually do that. I think that there is a certain amount of creativity that comes from taking risks. And you take risks and you say that there can be a show about the New Jersey Mafia, and there can be a show about maturing girls looking for sex in New York City. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. You know, we have plenty of history of shows that we took a risk and it didn't work out. Say about the 70s porno industry, I think that's working out, or the you know, thinking of vinyl, the story of how rock came to be. So I believe that there is space, and we do utilize AI for detection of better understanding our customers. And certainly we're looking at what do the customers want. But there is a clear definition of what you think the customers want, and actually allowing the creative process to take its course and give the customer something that they haven't been used to. So I believe that we should have the understanding on both. And certainly we want to be known as not the ones that are totally led by data, but only use the data on an ancillary basis.
Cody, cobots, robots, AI, and Verizon.
Yeah, you know, again, there's a lot of great stuff that are happening outside of my realm, you know, with our company that I'm probably not the best to speak of, or maybe even authorize, but as being part of, you know, supply chain, yeah, there is. As we run leaner and leaner as companies every day, you know, it is, you know, everybody should be looking at that. You know, I think in my world, you know, it's things, again, tracking shipments. If we're sending a load of expensive cards and seeing if they've been tossed around, kicked from the UPS guy or what have you, and that's only, it's
You
not something.
track that?
We've done it internally between, sharing equipment. So there's a lot of great things out there. I think for me, it's data crunching and market intelligence, because as we talk about protecting your brand, and again with the focus here, that's not the funnest stuff in the world, but it's super important. Is what should you be doing with your equipment? I mentioned before auditing. Are you getting what you're sending back? So somebody's not skimming off the top, or even that UPS person is taking that box somewhere. We don't track it at that level, but it is it's data crunching for us. And what do we do with that asset, and who should it go to? And so that's what we see from there. There's so much data out there, especially for a company our size. I'm dealing with every network and IT component across the world. So and a really lean staff. So now we're leaning on that more than ever to help us make those decisions, because two, there's money to be made off this stuff, and I know that's not necessarily where this is at, but if you're not monetizing your assets after you're done with them, it's silly, right? And we talk about, do I need to destroy it? Which some things we want to, There's government hard drives where we're pulling a truck up on site and it's being shredded right in front of everybody, and tracked, as opposed to other things that maybe get out there. But yeah, it's just a lot of money to be made. So where do you want that? Can you just wipe that drive? Can it be resold? And back to relying on partners and trainings. A story I do, and it won't take too long. It wasn't us, but it was an interesting a theft of some batteries from a cable company. It was actually in the state of Utah, and it was these 70-pound batteries that were for it's a story out there from Comcast, and it's the backup power for their 911 systems, all this important stuff, and somebody was breaking into these boxes, and I thought it was a great story of they finally went and stuck a little GPS tracker on there, worked with the U.S. Marshals, and followed it back and busted a $1 million ring for money laundering and just kind of catching that whole piece. So it was an interesting thing that not we did, but you could see those types of things now being implemented to protect their brands.
And how about you, John? AI, cobots, robots, drones. What is MLB doing and using to
for
protect?
us? It's again, I'm hearing and I'm seeing a
Right.
theme. It's really about the data more than anything else. I think some of you'll remember back in the day, you used to get a pack of these cards, and they have a little piece of bubble gum in it, and everything about the players you wanted to know. You'd have this picture and all of his stats. That was before Al Gore invented the internet. But nowadays, I just had a meeting with a guy a few months ago who came in and said, "Look, I can tell you, the batter hits the ball into left field. The player A goes to catch that ball. He's a left fieldman, and he misses it by just a hair. But I can tell you that the player B, if he had been playing, same team, but if he had been playing in the left field, he would have made it, because his stats say that he's got 4 more seconds per foot speed difference, and he could have caught that ball. So maybe you need to look at him being in left field." And I'm just going, how? How do you do that? We've got data going back to the 1960s that is being crunched in these data cubes. We use it in arbitration settings for contract negotiations. We're looking at expanding that. When you've got all these wearable computers, they've got baseball bats that aren't connected to anything in the world. You swing these suckers, and they can tell you exactly what your swing looked like, exactly where your feet were. They put it up on a screen, and you download it. It connects through USB. They got batting coaches where you hold the bat and you got an arm that goes along with you and does all these other measurements. You got all these wearables that baseball really wants to. You've seen, if you look out there, the things have changed so much over the years. Nowadays, it used to be you'd throw that pitch would get thrown, and you're watching on TV, or God forbid in the stands, trying to figure out if that was a ball or a strike or a what. And now they're putting little dots everywhere. Well, those little dots are not tracking the camera. Those are actually tracking the ball, the velocity, the direction. They'll every now and then you get an error in the data, and it looks like they launched it in outer space or something. It's kind of silly, but you got to constantly correct that stuff. That's really where we're going, and it's really scaring the crap out of us, because our players are those stats. And when you start talking about internet gambling, you start talking about contract negotiations, you start talking about how is this data used, and it's generally speaking not going to be used in favor of the player. They're usually used against the player in some way, or at least not necessarily benefiting the player. And we never want to put our players in a bad position. So we're constantly trying to figure out how to deal with this data out there, right down to, hey, we've got a plethora of domain names that we've reserved to make sure that nobody goes out there and puts up a data store that has this great name that everybody flocks to for gambling or something. So sometimes it's as little as something like that, but we're just trying to figure out how to deal with this stuff.
Last question before we go to questions from the audience. In a cybersecurity centric world, protecting your brand, so much of it comes down to intellectual property, and all three of your great brands are rich in intellectual property. We'll start, Stephen, with you. Any tricks of the trade or any stories you want to tell about how you really go about that you want to leave the audience with, how you protect your intellectual property, and why that's so important to the great HBO?
I better say something. We're losing people. I better say something good. We have coined a certain approach to security, and this is done because we don't have infinite resources, unlike all of you, and we also it's a reality that we have sensed, and we have statistics to back it. So here it is. Prior to airing a show, I can tell you that is an insane amount of resources that go right now about what we're going to air on Sunday night. Actually, tonight, what we're going to air. It's an amount of resources and monitoring that's going on. As I said before, what we do when we make it available, the digital watermarking that goes on it, the visual watermarking that goes on it, and so on, and how we track who has it, what, when. But here's the interesting part. There is a context, there is a time context to protecting your brand. And the time context pretty much determines the value of what you have and what would the impact be if you were to lose it or if it is compromised. So this helps you put context into the amount of security that you're going to put into something. So it is very easy to think of it in the movie industry, and it's rather complicated in other industries. So I'm lucky, I guess, to that extent. So I can tell you for a fact that after something airs, within, don't hold me to the minute, but within 45 to 60 minutes, it's going to be available for illegal downloading. So therefore, now there comes the question, how do we protect our reputation? How do we protect our brand? And I can tell you that there's very little we do because of the amount of money and effort and resources that we do not have. So, but here comes the context. So, there is the same exactly thing that you say is so valuable, and there is the context of or pre-air, so valuable, we're going to put so much effort to it, and then after it airs, very little. So, and I have tried that theory of context-based security with the time dimension in various industries, and I find that it is very, very similar in others. So the question, therefore, is to be able to assign a value, and not just a value to your asset, but a value to your asset as time goes by, or as certain milestones happen. It doesn't have to always be, 45 minutes after airing. It can be once we talked about it, once the board was notified, once the other agency was notified. But in our business, what is very critical is to consider security and the resources that we apply to it always on the context, and the context is very much time-bound.
Got it.
Yeah,
Cody.
I'll probably step a little further away from this question, being not quite my realm, of how the company handles security. But, one thing that I do want to say that may be a little bit out there, but is really about social responsibility as well, and, working conditions and things like that. I do want to, don't take that out of your thought process either when we talk about protecting your brand. It's big if you're utilizing companies that have poor working conditions, go back to the visiting these locations. So other than that, I'm probably going to stray
John?
away, and I'm sure he's got a better
John,
story.
for you, and then
No
we'll take
pressure.
questions from the audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't, intellectual property isn't the big thing for us. It's actually usually physical. It's a jersey, it's a mug.
Right.
Things that we're putting our licensing into and authorizing sale. We get a lot of unauthorized sales out there that we have to constantly monitor. So there's not a lot of the protection from that perspective. We do have a time constraint, of course.
Got it.
You know, guy gets off the team, nobody cares anymore.
Got it.
But yeah.
Interesting. Well, this is now the time for questions from the audience. Lindsay has a microphone that she'll take over to you. Who has some questions? And no questions about Starbucks cups, please. So, come on. Questions?
Yeah, this is Merritt Maximum Forester. It's actually a question more specifically for John, but it might be relevant for Steve as well. Given the explosion of analytics in the sports, and baseball probably being one of the leads for that, and that there has been an incident with Houston and St. Louis, and someone's actually gone to jail for tampering. I'm curious to what extent you at the league level are providing guidance to teams as it relates to the analytics, because that increasingly becomes potentially a protected IP to them, and also introduces the threats now of teams potentially hacking into other teams to mess with their analytical models to then generate inaccurate outputs that may influence their strategy and player development, things of that sort.
John?
Yeah, we tend to sit on the other side pushing back on what they're doing. So if they're going out there and being unsafe with their analytics, and we view it as problematic, so to speak, to use the vernacular, we'll push back and say, look, guys, we got a real problem with this. That's not a good thing. They don't generally call us. They don't exactly, we wear the white hats, they wear the black hats, that kind of thing. We maintain our own, although we do agree on a set standard on what we're going to use when it comes to contract negotiations and such. But generally speaking, they don't really want to work with us a whole lot on it because they don't want us to have what they have. And we don't want them to have what we have either. We think our stats are better. And of course, they think theirs are better, and they use it for different reasons.
More questions? Questions? There you go. Lindsay, there's one in the back there. Gentleman in blue shirt.
All right, just give me a second.
Wait till the mic comes over so that way everyone can hear you, please. Thank you so much. There you go.
Thank you. To Cody, given the blurring of lines between work at home due to bring your own device and mobility, I've read recently your threat report, and I'm just wondering, how are you going to educate, consumers, who are accessing their corporate enterprise networks from their own devices and dramatically increasing your threat surface?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, again, sadly, a little bit out of my realm. I wish I could speak a little broad or clear on that topic. I think, for me, in only interfacing with the employees, I would just, just not going to be able to provide a lot of information. Sorry about that.
Well, we run into that on the players' side, though. The players, like I said, they're constantly getting these devices thrown at them. We're trying to give them information that's sometimes of very sensitive nature. And we've put software out there like, I think it's BlackBerry's bought them now, but they used to be called Good. Worst name in the world for a company. Well, I guess the best name, for marketing, but can't stand that name. But BlackBerry bought them now, and they're a leading security firm when it comes to software on the iPhones for banks and such. Own little space. Big Ting Han is doing something very similar, a little less onerous. That's why I brought them up. Where we're trying to carve out a space on a personal phone or a personal device that we can then yank that back remotely when we need to, or protect it so that you can't just copy what's there. Matter of fact, Big Ting Han came up with it. Good was great software, and it's wonderful software. It's a little expensive, but it's wonderful software, BlackBerry now. The problem that we came up with was that's great, but if you've got a document up there, you can just take a picture of your phone, right? Well, Good came up with the very low-tech thought of, well, why don't we just go ahead and watermark the screen with the guy's name? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. I don't know why nobody thought of it before, but they thought of it, and it works. So it's really, if you can carve out a little space that when negotiations are over or the employee leaves the company, both situations that we have, you can just yank back that space and you haven't touched a single thing on their phone and that just disappears from what they're using. That's been kind of a solution we've employed.
But there is a disparity between the security we apply to the cell phone and the security we apply to the laptop. So we need to work to bring them at the same level. Now, the theory, obviously, of zero trust helps us develop security accordingly. In our case, we've actually gone to some people consider it extreme, to require people that access sensitive applications to have fixed IP at home. Then we can build rules around that. And that's not outlandish, makes some people money. But above and beyond that, monitoring goes a long way. So the technologies are there, they're not very complex, but it's more about building a policy that recognizes what kind of applications are being accessed by what people and build profiles that fit that. And then realize they're going to access it with iPad, with phone, with laptop, so you better have the same baseline of security across all of those.
John, Cody, Stephen, thank you all very much. Let's all give them
Thank
a
you.
round of
Thank you.
applause. Thank you all.